Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us on the eve of the G7 meeting. As civil society organizations, we've assembled because we believe we are at a critical moment in history and that this is a monumental meeting that will determine whether or not many people will either be able to move forward into a new world or millions of people will be left behind. I'd like to thank those of you who have joined us, including our panelists from around the world. We also have this conference being streamed inside of the Media Centre in Cornwall at the G7 Summit, but many of us are assembling outside in order to bring some of those voices from around the world to those leaders. This is part of an effort to push for a great recovery plan, recognizing that we do not want to go into a Great Depression that will see countless more lives lost, but in fact, unleash a new era of sustainable, inclusive prosperity for all. And this Great Recovery Plan has received signatures from 380 people in 77 countries, from former heads of state like Mary Robinson, through to civil society activists in India who we'll hear from, who are feeling the brunt of the crisis, through to many of the world's largest organizations representing millions of people around the world. I'd like to invite our panelists to contribute and to share their perspectives. Each panelist will speak very briefly for 2 minutes. We will then open up for questions from those on the line. And those questions, please keep them brief. We'd ask those of you asking questions to be very specific, and we'll try to get through as many questions as possible. Each panelist will also introduce themselves, and I will call on each panelist as we go through the flow. Paul, you're in India, but representing people around the world. Please kick us off and share your perspectives.
Thank you, Rajiv. Friends, it's a very difficult moment to share. COVID has unleashed a new form of discrimination, violence, and terror, especially among the most excluded communities in several parts of the world. Dalits of Asia, Roma, Gypsy, Sinti in Europe, Haratin, Ozu, and Oru communities, and similar from Africa, Quilombolas in Brazil, and several others. We are on the verge of splitting as two worlds, those who have vaccines, those who do not have vaccine and healthcare. Just to say one statistic, more than half of all those who have been counted as dead in the municipal corporation area of Delhi are sanitation workers who happen to be Dalits. And this is the same across the world. And if you look at in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, in Nepal, in India, and several parts of other places, most of the frontline workers are coming from intergenerationally excluded communities. It's not just vaccine. They have been deprived of their wages. They have been asked to go back, and migrant communities who are completely been dislocated and their livelihoods totally lost. And not only that, they are facing discrimination even in access to government and entitlements and resources which they are entitled to. And in this situation, especially important is that you make healthcare and especially vaccines available to all. And the People's Vaccine Campaign, as many of you know, is on. And we are demanding that the waivers that are blocking the production of these vaccines and other TRIPS agreements which are blocking be released. And especially as G7, I think you have a great responsibility to bridge these gaps. And I appeal to the leaders to see that when these are happening, that the most excluded communities in these societies, in these countries, are also protected with due policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Maaza, thank you very much for joining us from South Africa. Please contribute and share your perspective.
Thank you so much for having me. As Rajiv has said, my name is Maaza Seyoum. I'm with the African Alliance. The African Alliance is the African convener for the People's Vaccine Alliance. And in that role, we coordinate and work with civil society organizations all around the continent on issues of vaccine equity. And it's actually a perfect time for me to be on this panel because just this morning, we posted a letter from over 140 of our collaborators and civil society representatives from around the continent speaking to the leaders of the G7, particularly the ones who are blocking the TRIPS waiver, and particularly the ones who have already made terrible mistakes on the African continent. These are countries that have a bad colonial history in Africa. These are countries, for example, like Namibia, like Germany, that just apologized for some of their atrocities in Namibia in the last century. And we encourage them in this letter to think about their actions and join the right side of history. We are trying to spare them a future round of apologies. I echo what my comrade Paul has said in India. We just want to highlight, as one of our friends and colleagues from Amnesty International, Stephen Cockburn, highlighted in one of his tweets, that the town of Cornwall has received more vaccinations than 22 African countries. This is unimaginable. And as our epidemiologist friends have told us, it is unwise to think that you can protect yourself as G7 countries from an airborne virus that mutates. Every epidemiologist has told us that this virus will keep mutating. You are not safe unless we are all safe. We definitely appreciate all the discussions that have come around about donations. We know that G7 countries are focused on donations at the moment of vaccines. We do not want charity, we want justice. And African and other global South manufacturers have the ability to produce vaccines. We want the TRIPS waiver to be supported firmly, and we want to go forward and be able to generate more vaccines. The donations will not save us. More vaccines need to be produced, and that is our stance. So thank you very much, and I'm available to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Maaza. Mitzi, thank you for joining us from Fridays for the Future. And we are seeing young people around the world mobilizing to save our future in this moment. Please, we invite you to share some of your perspectives.
In Fridays for Future and with other youth activists, we're seeing world leaders and how they're responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we can't help but see the similarities of how they're responding to the climate crisis, the similarities of how the most marginalized sectors of society, the most exploited countries in the global South are again and again being left behind. And it doesn't make sense to us that you tell us that you're here to fight for our future, that we're taught in school that politicians are here to serve the people, yet what are we seeing? The G7 has a historical debt to countries in the global South for profiting off our continued overexploitation, which has made us so vulnerable to the different crises like the COVID pandemic and the climate crisis. My country, the Philippines, has had the most number of extreme weather events for the past 20 years, and I grew up with thunder and howling winds banging on my door and windows, constantly fearing drowning in my own bedroom. We're seeing that the climate crisis is amplifying the COVID pandemic because the typhoons that are hitting us again and again are hitting the COVID testing sites. The people are left with no choice when there's a typhoon but to go to evacuation centers, which make them more vulnerable to the COVID pandemic. With the COVID response, we're seeing once again, just like with climate, how the most vulnerable countries and people are left to drown in the floods that the G7 and other global North countries have caused. In order to protect the profit of the richest countries, G7 leaders, if you're really there to meet, to talk about pressing issues of the world, if you are true to your mandate of being servants of the people, which we've been taught ever since in school, then step up and put the people first. Starting with vaccines for all, the immediate and just transition from the dirty fossil fuel economy and canceling the debt that our countries have had no choice but to borrow because of the exploitation of the G7 countries. It may seem like a tall order, like I'm saying too much, but my question is, why are we compromising on people's lives? Why is this something that seems like, why do we have to demand for the bare minimum? Once you realize this, that everything that we're asking for, that civil society, that the youth have been asking for, is bare minimum and something that has to be done, then we can begin to talk about all the other historical injustices and devastation that the G7 countries have caused our countries.
Thank you very much, Mitzi. And I know that the Media Center is with us as well, and Ollie is trying. Civil society space is a little limited, but hopefully we will be sharing this video also with media directly straight after this. I'd like to now invite our next speaker, Lysa John. Lysa, who represents thousands of civil society organizations around the world. Lysa, please introduce yourself and share some of your perspectives.
Thank you, Rajiv. It's really great to be here with my fellow activists who've said really important and inspiring things. I just want to reinforce a few points they've made already. There is one thing that people across the world are demanding right now. It is to scale up the production of the vaccine and scale down the prices of the vaccine. And what we're all calling for together really is the fact that every single person on this planet needs to receive the vaccine at an affordable and in an affordable and accessible way by the end of next year. And at least 60% of the population of the world should be receiving it by the end of this year. So I'm in Johannesburg in South Africa, where most people of my age group at least have no kind of idea of when we will actually get the vaccine, and we're still people who have a job, who have housing, who have some level of security, economic security that we can rely on. So I think, as Mitzi said, it's simply unfathomable. I mean, it's really mind-boggling that you have the richest countries, the most powerful leaders of the world doing really very little to step up and demonstrate the global leadership that we need right now. Instead, you have the people with the least amount of power, the least amount of resources, going out of their way, putting their lives at stake. It's the frontline workers that we see in the health system. It's the frontline activists who are defending the rights of the most excluded groups. It's ordinary citizens who are really taking up the charge to keep information correct, to provide information to groups that need it the most, to ensure that services, I mean, you've seen, the whole network of people that got together to even provide oxygen cylinders in India, for instance. And it's really ordinary people who are actually, bearing that mantle of leadership and taking, bringing some kind of silver lining or hope in this crisis. So what we're seeing really, and what we're asking for, is for governments to acknowledge that citizens and civil society have a critical role to play in the solution to the COVID crisis, as well as how we recover and renew ourselves after that. And in doing that, we need much stronger democratic and civic systems. We need to kind of really counter the deliberate dismantling of the opportunities for people to speak out, to people to engage and to be part of the decision-making process. And I'm just going to end by saying that 39 countries in a span of 1 year introduced laws that negatively affect or restrict civic freedoms of ordinary people. Can you imagine that kind of action, either on climate financing, either on addressing the debt restructuring issues, or financing the COVID vaccine? So there is the will of governments to do something, but they need to stop being self-serving and put people first, like my colleague said. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Lysa. And I'd like to invite Priscilla to join us. Priscilla, please, if you can also turn your video on. Thank you for being with us from Ghana. And please come forth and share your perspective.
Hello, I hope you don't mind. My internet is quite unstable, so my video might go off at some point. So first of all, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I am Priscilla Nyaaba from Ghana, and I work with the Youth Harvest Foundation Ghana, where we empower young people to achieve their full potentials in life. I'm also a registered general nurse and a public health nurse for that matter, and I'm responsible for maternal, child, and adolescent health in the rural areas. I'm so happy to share the vaccines appetite situation in Ghana. I mean, with the overpopulation of 31 million, Ghana so far has been able to vaccinate only 1.2% of the population. And for those who even qualify under the government restricted vaccination, out of the number that qualify, a number of them are not able to receive these doses. And this is as a result of unavailability of enough vaccines. I mean, out of desperation to secure enough vaccines for the people, the government of Ghana has been accused of buying 3.4 million doses of overpriced Sputnik V vaccines, which is sold on the international market as $10 per dose, but was sold to Ghana at $19 per dose. And this was done through some dubious middlemen from the Russian investment fund. This is yet another example of how global inequalities continue to fuel and prolong the pandemic. Even before the pandemic, the government could only afford 10% of the cost of the routine vaccines that we give in this country. And as we speak, Ghana debt to GDP is very high, and the impact of COVID-19 has really worsened our economic situation. And for that matter, sorry.
I think we may have lost Priscilla there.
Yeah, I'm still there. Hello.
Okay, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Does that matter? Yep.
Yes. So I'm only saying that on this point, as at Ghana now, because of the COVID-19, when the COVID-19 started, only a few centers have the facility to store vaccines in rural areas and hard-to-reach areas. Communities that are not having electricity, power outages, we are not able to keep the vaccines at the right temperatures. Since the beginning of the pandemic, the Ministry of Health was able to procure only 2,343 vaccine fridges for distribution across the 16 regions of Ghana. And currently, Ghana has only 226 accredited laboratories. I'm using this platform to appeal to the G7 to, as a matter of agency, immediately prioritize closing the funding gap of COVAX and related expenditure with the G7, paying its fair share of the burden, that is the estimated 60%, to be able to provide adequate support to developing countries for rollout of vaccines and treatments everywhere. The G7 need to stop hoarding vaccines and start sharing extra doses with poorer countries. They need to deliver about 1 billion vaccines by end of August to developing countries. I'm also appealing to them that it's not enough to just deliver vaccines, but there is a need for real action and investment in strengthening the local health system of poorer countries. It is clear that the in emergency, low-income countries cannot rely solely on import of vaccines from wealthier nations. Therefore, investing in local production is critical. COVID-19 vaccines and for the production of routine immunization and other health products. Few months ago, the African Union launched the Partnership for African Vaccine Manufacturing, and several countries are making progress. The G7 need to support these countries to boost local production of vaccines for their people. There is a need to also invest in building the various countries' capacity, sharing of knowledge and technology, and support with cold chain equipment to ensure efficient and well-functioning and well-maintained cold chain system to keep vaccines at the best quality and avoid losses and wastage. Investment in strengthening country surveillance system and building modern tech laboratories will enhance the detection of the testing of COVID-19 in Africa. Thank you once again for the platform.
Thank you very much, Priscilla, and for sharing those views. Very critical to underline the important messages that are, if people want to look at the greatrecovery.net in the letter, some very concrete asks around the financing, around waiving the patents, and around dosage sharing, very critical in this moment. Alessandra, thank you so much for joining us from Brazil, a very critical economy for many of us right now. Please share with us some of your perspectives. We're very much looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much, Rajiv. I am Alessandra Nilo from Gestos, Brazil, and I coordinate a coalition of more than 60 organizations pushing for sustainable development. And I was also very engaged in the moment in Brazil in 2007 when we issued a compulsory license for efavirenz to guarantee people's access to antiretroviral medicines at that time. So I think we are here today not just because we care about these serious problems, but because it's possible to solve these problems. And for me, this is a key point. And the challenge for us today is not only to recovering from the COVID-19 disasters, but also to prevent future tragedies from occurring. I also think that we understand that pharmaceutical companies are placing profit before lives, despite it being largely supported by public resources. But what we cannot accept at this point is to have governments who should be defending our rights, supporting these companies, especially when the World Trade Organization, between the TRIPS agreements provides the legal measures to counterbalance this greedy position. One of my concerns is that I think the public opinion worldwide and in Europe, they don't know what is happening, and they don't know that Europe is the most resistant group to TRIPS waiver at this moment, led by Germany. So even the US is in favor, and we cannot accept that. And I think there is also a disconnection because the European Parliament adopted a resolution just in May to end AIDS by 2030, and they made a clear call to support TRIPS waiver. So we are seeing contradictory positions within the European Union. We need to address that. So as said before, we really need the G7, especially the EU governments, to support the revised request for TRIPS waiver brought by South Africa and TRIPS as soon as possible. And the G7 must pay their fair share of the burden and agree to immediately also start those sharing with other countries delivering at least 1 billion by the end of August and ensure that at least 250 million are vaccinated by the end of August. Because we know it is possible, but what we need now is really to have responsible leaders that will defend our rights and that will make sure that we will get out of this pandemic with a much more solidarity international community. This is what we need right now. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alejandro. I'm now going to invite the media center. Ollie's there and has been receiving questions from journalists throughout the day. He's on the ground there in Cornwall. And we are also hearing questions from many of those also working on the climate crisis, who feel that if we can't see action at the G7 on vaccines, then there is very little hope for the climate summit that the UK will be hosting later this year. Ollie, would you like to just share some of your reflections, questions, anything that you're hearing from the media? I know that the UK Coalition also just held their press conference, which you were participating in.
Hi, Raj. Hi, everyone. Yeah, thanks so much. We've just been having a discussion here, which actually overran a bit with the Crack the Crisis, the UK C7 and the other NGOs that are here. There's been quite an interesting discussion, as you can see, in terms of where the announcements are from the G7. A lot of push from the leaders to say they're now going to deliver this 1 billion doses, but push back from many of our colleagues here to say that is nowhere near enough. And I think, as has been highlighted by many of you just now, the question of how the financing will deliver both on the pandemic, but also on the climate financing. We heard quite a lot just now about the potential for 100 billion through special drawing rights reallocations. That's still not clear. And is that actually new money, or is it just moving money from one pot to another? We don't want to see the pandemic reducing the other crucial areas that are needed in terms of climate and inequalities. So I think it's a fairly united push from civil society. We had quite a few journalists that have left details with me. I'm afraid we're shortly going to be kicked out of this room, but I have the details. I'm going to forward on the quotes that we've been discussing with all of you, as well as the contacts for the various journalists that we have been able to speak to. There may well be some further opportunities later today. We've been in touch with Lysa about possible interviews as well, and others as they come in. So I'll certainly keep you all posted, and thank you for everyone for everything that you're doing at this very difficult time.
Thanks, Ollie, and thank you for joining us from the field. For those of us here online and outside, it sounds like the G7 is not delivering what it needs to for people and planet, and that we need to up our pressure significantly. And also, as our eyes turn towards the G20, which includes the other 60% of the world's people, we need to also ensure that that leadership continues. I would invite those of you to continue to share many of the key messages that are out there. Is there anyone that would like to make any final remarks or open reflections from our panel? Or anyone that would like to put their hand up? We'll invite 1 or 2 remarks. We do have a few more minutes left. Maaza, please.
Thank you, Rajiv. I just wanted to highlight something related to what our colleague Alessandra said in Brazil. You know, in Africa, and Lysa, I think you might have mentioned this as well. In Africa, and in South Africa in particular, we have been here before. You know, we were told 20 years ago that we couldn't handle treatment rollout, that we didn't have a right to ARVs, and we ended up implementing some of the largest and most successful treatment programs in the world. You know, so here we are 20 years later being told the same kind of nonsense about how we cannot manufacture vaccines and that these countries would rather give us donations. And I hear, Ollie, what you're saying about, you know, this large number of donations that are being given, but we just want to reiterate that, you know, this trickle of donations, it sounds like a lot, but they're not going to save us from this pandemic. And at the same time as these donations are being given, there are 9 pharmaceutical company CEOs that have become billionaires in the last year. You know, so when you compare what's being given to what people are earning on the basis of government-funded programs, it is completely unacceptable. So we appreciate the donations, but we do not want charity. We want justice, and we've been here before, and we will not accept it this time either. So thank you.
Thanks, Maaza. And I think we may have some journalists on the line. If we'd like to now open for questions. It's worth noting that the 1 billion is only 1/11 of the 11 billion doses that are required in this moment. So I think Maaza's point around a fraction is very well taken. Are there any journalists with us that would like to speak at this moment? Okay. And we have Sophie Willis and a few others with us. I don't know if any of you would like to contribute. Please just unmute. If not, we will continue to share the release, and interviews will be happening bilaterally with panelists throughout the weekend based upon the video that we'll be posting from this event. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. This has been a very lively discussion. It's been powerful to have voices from India, from Philippines, from South Africa, from Brazil, from many, many different parts of the world, expressing their concerns, expressing their beliefs, expressing the key messages that we are looking for, the demands from our G7 leaders in these coming days. We will also be responding to what we see coming out of the conference, and we look forward to re-huddling as a community of civil society groups as we continue to move the great recovery forward in the months ahead, with 70 countries now signing up and 300 organizations contributing to a common call to action. Thank you to all of our partners, including ActionAid, the People's Vaccine Alliance, the Action for Sustainable Development Coalition, which has been putting a lot of energy in, the Great Recovery Collective, and others from around the world for joining us. We look forward to continuing this struggle together.